Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest iteration in our Innovations in Caregiving webinar series. My name is Laurance Stuntz. I am the director of the Massachusetts eHealth Institute at the MassTech Collaborative. MassTech is a quasi-public state economic development agency here, and the eHealth Institute is focused on the digital health ecosystem, health IT adoption and innovation, and caregiving. And so as part of my role here at MassTech, I lead the Mass Caregiving Initiative. A little bit of background on the Caregiving Initiative. Starting a few years ago, we got really interested in the impact of caregiving on employers and on the overall economy of Massachusetts. And as part of that work, we co-founded the Massachusetts Caregiver Coalition to work with employers to recognize, honor, and support their caregiving employees. And as we were talking with employers and employed caregivers and the community, we recognized that there was a lot of caregivers who may not be employed, and we wanted to figure out ways to help and support them. So earlier this year, we expanded the Caregiver Coalition work into a broader mass caregiving initiative. We are a public-private partnership. We work in addition to with employers. We have a communities arm working with the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and Mass Home Care, and then the innovation series that this webinar is a part of. So this innovation series is designed to highlight data around the impacts of caregiving on caregivers and care recipients, and on the economy broadly, and to present innovative solutions to support caregivers. So we will be successful with this series if all of you want to try something that you hear about in this series, or you're inspired to develop your own innovative solutions to caregiving challenges. So I encourage you all to do that. And if that happens, let us know about it. Maybe we'll be able to highlight your solution on this series as well. So thanks again for coming. Today's topic is around addressing loneliness and social isolation, and it's a critical topic for us and for caregivers and for care recipients. So, older adults who are lonely, and by loneliness meaning people who feel alone, they may not even necessarily be physically alone, but they feel alone, or loneliness, or socially isolated, meaning they objectively don't have many social connections. Both of adults in this situation are at greater risk for serious medical conditions. And COVID-19, the pandemic, has exacerbated social isolation and loneliness for older adults and for all of us, frankly. But we're focusing this conversation on older adults. But there are some technology-based and non-technology-based solutions that we want to tell you about. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, but before we jump into the webinar, a couple of quick logistics. We are recording this, and we have enabled the Zoom live transcript, so you can follow along on the closed caption if you want to. There's a live transcript button down at the bottom of your screen to turn on closed captioning. We will have time for audience Q&A at the end of the panel discussion, so please post your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And after the webinar, please take 5 minutes, or 2 minutes actually, to respond to the survey that pops up. It really helps us out, helps us understand what we're doing well, understand where we can improve. So fill that out. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Brenda Labbe. Brenda has worked at Greater Springfield Senior Services, Inc., an aging service access point in Springfield, Mass. Since 2012. She started as a caregiver specialist for the Massachusetts Family Caregiver Support Program and was in that role for 8 years. And now, as Greater Springfield's new community outreach director, she will oversee the expansion and development of the information and referral and family caregiver departments within the 12 cities and towns in Greater Springfield Senior Services service area. And as an informal family caregiver herself, she has an intimate understanding of caregivers' daily challenges and is steadfastly committed to connecting caregivers to appropriate area resources. Brenda, welcome to the webinar, and I'll let you take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Laurance. I'm happy to be here with you today to share some examples in ways in which our family caregiver support program at Greater Springfield Senior Services continues to strive to meet the unique needs of the caregivers in our area, in our catchment. The overarching principle of the Massachusetts Family Caregiver Support Program is to focus on connecting caregivers to their community resources so that they can be supported in their caregiving efforts. But it's also to bring awareness to their need for regular self-care and for regular respite. And we, Greater Springfield Senior Services, we recognize and we champion the cause of being able to meet those unique individualized needs for respite. We recognize that there isn't just a one-size-fits-all approach to providing a caregiver a respite or the opportunity for a little bit of stress relief. And therein lies where we've been very proud to say that we customize and can think out of the box and be innovative in meeting some of those needs. Some of the things I'd like to share with you for examples, as a private nonprofit, at different times we have different funding and grants that might come to us. And so that is why, as moving forward, as I speak about some of the items that we either procure or acquire for or purchase for a caregiver, that is how we are able to do that. With the onset of the public health crisis that COVID-19 has presented, certainly we knew that the social isolation for caregivers was going to be even more pronounced than before, but it's always been there. A few years ago, with one of our funding sources in mind, it was specifically geared to it was specifically for caregivers that were caring for somebody with dementia. And within those guidelines of that particular program, it was called the ADSSP for reference. We put together, as we met with individual caregivers that we receive referrals for, we would put together a customized caregiver packet of information. And it didn't necessarily have to be very glossy or fancy. It can be something as simple as some of the free resources that are available at the NIA, the National Institute on Aging. There's a wealth of information there that we drew upon, as well as the Alzheimer's Association. They also have a wealth of information with publications available. So we would, for example, meet with a caregiver. One gentleman comes to mind. He is caring for his mother. He was disabled himself, and his mother was a homebound elder with, moderate to late stages of dementia. She could not be left alone, and this gentleman really needed to have some information and be able to have support in his native language, which was not English. And so we recognized that, in order to connect him to Spanish-speaking support groups, what was available. He wasn't able to leave, and nor was he comfortable to leave her. So we were able to work with him to identify he was comfortable using the internet and using technology. So we purchased an iPad for him. And then once we delivered the iPad, I coached him for putting some additional applications on his iPad that could really speak to a broad range of some of those caregiver needs. So, for example, an app such as Calm or Headspace was able to afford him the opportunity to offer himself that self-care and respite that we talked about by being able to offer himself some stress relief. But then we're able to connect him to the Alzheimer's Association, where at their website, they have the ability to offer their materials in Spanish, which was his native language. And so he was able to connect to an outside world at a time when he wasn't able to leave his apartment and also chose not to because he wanted to be by his mother's bedside. We were able to reduce those barriers and really kind of bring the world to him through that iPad. And that was something that he was very grateful for, and we were too, to be able to see the difference that it made in his life. And a little along the same lines, but and also a little bit differently at the same time last year, this was actually pre-pandemic. We had another caregiver that we were working with, and this gal was caring for her mother, and she actually wanted to attend a caregiver support group in person. She too was disabled and didn't want to leave her home. She was caring for her mother, and she was encountering a lot of challenging behaviors. she mentioned to me that really she wanted to attend an Alzheimer's support group locally. But the barrier for this gal was the public transportation didn't run in the evening hours when this particular caregiver support group was available. So through our process of working in the family caregiver support program and making a request to make a small purchase for her, I identified that this gal was very comfortable using Uber. She already had that technology and that comfort level. So we approached this from a different angle, which was to purchase some Uber gift cards for her that she could load into her account. And that afforded her the opportunity, because she had very financial limited means, to be able to schedule those Uber rides in the evening, both to and from the caregiver support group. And she was able to do that. So for her, she wanted to get out of the house, and we were able to reduce those barriers by not only leveraging, that resource, which is just, transportation, specialized transportation in the community, but it really made a difference for her. And again, we're, so grateful for our funding resources and, what the flexibility that the Family Caregiver Support Program can offer. And so I want to just share one more example, if I could. And again, that speaks to the ways in which we at Greater Springfield Senior Services strive to meet the unique needs. Again, I think it can't be said enough that really respite and providing stress relief for a caregiver doesn't have to be a cookie cutter approach. Just listening a little bit more in depth and using the community resources and being creative to meet those needs can make quite a difference. So in our community, also the independent living centers, affectionately known as ILCs, I work with ours locally very frequently, and they have a program where they are able to build ramps for folks. It's called the Home Sweet Home program. And we will oftentimes partner and our resources together to try to get ramps built for folks. And also sometimes with family means, they're able to cost share and chip in towards that as well. So it's a nice blending of community resources when we can have more than one entity that can, come to the table with a little bit of funding to help out. But I just want to share with you her words. I received a card from her. We were able to build a ramp for this family within the last 6 months. And again, I think that hearing from somebody's own words and what a difference, something can make in what a difference something can make in their life will, I think, speak more volumes. So, dear Greater Springfield Senior Services, we are sending along a huge thank you. Oh my goodness, freedom. We love, love, love our ramp. We've been stuck in the home for a very long time. And since the ramp was installed, we've been able to walk to the mailbox and visit with friends in the neighborhood. We've driven through parks, and we even went to Panera one day. This ramp has changed our lives dramatically, thanks to all who've helped with providing the scholarship for the ramp. And so the scholarship she's referring to is the approach that Greater Springfield Senior Services is able to do through those funding sources that I mentioned. As a private nonprofit, oftentimes having different funding streams. But this was a family of a mother and a daughter, both disabled, living together, and they weren't able to get out of their home, much less to get out. And we recognize at a time when social isolation is so rampant that something as simple as a ramp, it may seem very simple to us, but yet for them, it was such a giant barrier. They couldn't afford it. And what a difference it was we were able to make in their lives through this program to be able to give them access to the outside world. And I did follow up with her after we received this thank you and noted that they were certainly taking precautions as they were going out. But even, during the health crisis, for the two of them to be able to get in their own car and drive around locally, just help them to feel that much less socially isolated. So I just want to share that final example, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on. But again, I think the Family Caregiver Support Program is a true blessing to our communities. So
Brenda, Brenda, thank you so much. I love to hear the sort of the personal stories of how the work that people are doing in this area really impacts real humans. And so thank you very much for sharing that. Really quickly, Family Caregiver Support Program, is that open to anybody? Is that open to only certain people? Who can call?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the Massachusetts Family Caregiver Support Program has, I'd say the best way for folks to connect with and find out if they're eligible for the program, because there is some age and eligibility criteria. There's 4 different categories, and just in the interest of time, I won't go into all of them. Is to call their local ASAP, Aging Service Access Point. We are one of 25 that cover every city and town across Massachusetts. So an Aging Service Access Point, such as ourselves, Greater Springfield Senior Services, is available to anybody in the state of Massachusetts, from Cape Cod to the Berkshires. I would say that, have them contact their local ASAP. If they're not sure what their local Aging Service Access Point is, they can contact Mass Options at 1-800-244-4636, and Mass Options can connect them to their local Aging Service Access Point.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much, Brenda. So we like to, with these innovation webinars, like to focus on both sort of really low tech or no tech innovations like Brenda described, but we also are interested in higher tech and whether there are technology-based or software-based solutions that can help support this. So to address this, I'd like to introduce Mike Weissel. Mike is currently the CEO at SecureSeniorConnections, which is a digitally enabled solution to help seniors with issues of loneliness and social isolation. From 2013 to 2019, Mike was on the executive leadership team at Optum, and prior to that, spent 17 years at Oliver Wyman, a leading management consulting firm, where he founded and led the healthcare practice. Mike holds a BA from UMass Amherst and an MBA from Duke. He lives here in Newton and is passionate about improving the healthcare system. Mike, welcome to the webinar. I look forward to listening to your talk.
Great. Thanks, Laurance. And I'm really excited to be here today and have a chance to talk to everybody. So thanks so much. And SecureSeniorConnections, we're a new company. We were actually founded by the original founder of United Healthcare. And he was super focused on wanting to figure out if there was a platform that could be created to help older adults prevent and reduce loneliness. And one of the many segments that we do serve are caregivers. So, and I'm honored to be able to lead that company. Brenda gave some great examples of some in-person things and some ways they're helping people kind of day to day. And we've taken a bit of a digital route to start. One of the things we noticed, of course, is that AARP had done a bunch of studies on seniors and their use of technology. And there's a new study that they have that just came out that showed that over 75% of seniors, really people over the age of 70, 75% have smartphones, and they are generally confident in their ability to navigate the online world. And so our goal was to leverage that idea and create a safe place for seniors to interact online with the hope that we can add additional in-person activities and connect them to in-person activities in the future. So what we've essentially created, for lack of a better analogy, is a virtually enabled senior center. It's complementary to many local activities that members might also have access to. Of course, COVID exacerbated issues for seniors in particular, especially those who might be afraid to be out in public settings, those who don't have transportation or can't get access to transportation, or those who need help in the middle of the night or want, companionship or something in the middle of the night. And that's what we put together. And our center is also a bit unique because it's national in nature, meaning we have seniors interacting with each other from all over the country. And then behind the scenes, we're using the science of loneliness to really help try and reduce and prevent the loneliness that they might be facing. It's not rocket science necessarily about how you reduce loneliness, but it's not an easy thing to do, right? I mean, there's really 4 things you need to try to help people get after. You have to help them engage with others. You want them to be able to tell their story. People love to tell their story. You want to assist them in building trustworthy relationships, and you really want to help them be part of something bigger than themselves. And so everything on our site in this kind of virtual senior center we have really behind the scenes is all designed to get after those 4 main areas in terms of the recommendations we might make to people, or just the content and things we have available. And so we do have a wide variety of content and activities available for members on the platform. We have lots of relevant articles and videos for people, everything from things that they can do for fun and ways to do Zoom calls with their grandkids to deep important articles about what an advanced directive is, or how to, or what does it mean to be a caregiver and actually take care of yourself as a caregiver. We have 90,000 volunteering opportunities across the country that are on the platform for people to do virtual volunteering or volunteering in their community. We have groups that people can join, which are, think about them as kind of very as safe, walled garden, kind of Facebook-oriented topic groups. Again, we have everything from gardening to arts and crafts to caregiving to things around relationships and intimacy, grief, downsizing, things like that. We have a whole community section. This is an area that allows seniors to make one-to-one connections with each other for companionship. They can do text on the platform. They can also do video on the platform without ever having to share personal information with each other. Another safety feature that we have built in. We have some games they can play, and then we are currently running about 40 live virtual events per month for the members to take part in as well. So as I mentioned, we're a newer company. We launched officially with our first members on May 1st. We have about 6,500 registered members today. In that period of time, they've had about 35,000 sessions on the platform. 2,500 members have joined those safe Facebook groups I've mentioned. About 1,700 people have attended some of our live events. We've had 2,000 of those individual connections made, and those individual connections, people have exchanged almost 7,000 messages between each other. And interestingly enough, we never talk about the word loneliness. We never mention it in anything that we're doing. But we do take a loneliness survey when people join. We use the John Gearfield scale, and we've seen almost 50% of our members maxing out the loneliness scale and another 25% kind of moderately lonely. And we're just in the process now of kind of re-benchmarking that loneliness score for some of our members. And we are seeing some reduction for some people. Of course, some people go up. We can't control everything that happens in their lives, but we're excited about what it means. I wanted to go back. Some of our live events that we are talking about, we are doing caregiver support and grief support groups. We're also doing things like book clubs and yoga and coffee chats and mindfulness and aging at home. And we do see a number of our members obviously are active in their community, but a bunch of them actually are also homebound or somehow more socially isolated. And we've become a way for them to kind of interact with people across the country as well as their own community. I thought I would just tell a couple of really quick stories that have happened so far for us. I did a call with some of our members a week ago, and I had a member who told me that she recently went to her therapist and told her therapist that she no longer needed her medication. She had found a community that was caring and that she was interested in, and it was Secure Senior Connections, and she was excited to be able to stop her medication. We had another woman who's from Oklahoma, just in our first couple of weeks. And she went and used the search function that we have to find another member who lived near her. Turned out that this man, that gentleman he found also lived near her in Oklahoma. Turned out they belonged to the same church. They had never met each other. But her last comment to us was, things are really starting to heat up now. Which we loved, because there's nothing better for reducing loneliness than somebody making a really personal connection with someone. So in our next phase, we're looking for ways to better connect our members in person and things that are happening in their local community. And we really want to be able to act as a complement to other senior centers and extend things back into the home. So Laurance, I think it's back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks for introducing us to Secure Senior Connections. It's great that you've gotten that much traction over just the short 5 months that you've been live and out there. I'd love to hear it. So I'd like to ask Kathryn Downs, as will be moderating our panel, to join us. Kathryn is the Policy Director at the Executive Office of Elder Affairs here in Massachusetts. EOEA's mission is to promote the well-being of older adults and their caregivers and help older adults thrive in communities of their choosing. As Policy Director, Kathryn helps manage the Commonwealth's age and dementia-friendly efforts and key issues such as family caregiving and social isolation and loneliness. And I would say that in addition to the bare bio, Kathryn has been passionate in helping us get the caregiving initiative and the Massachusetts Caregiver Coalition off the ground and keeping the energy behind it. So I'd like to thank her for that as well. So Kathryn, welcome, and I guess you'll introduce the other panelists.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurance, and thank you for such a gracious and generous introduction. So I have the great privilege of moderating a panel for the latter half of this webinar, and I'm so excited to bring together some new friends like Mike and some old friends and colleagues who you'll see in just a minute. I'm going to ask that Sandra Harris from AARP, Massachusetts, Molly Evans from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and Sinan Erzurumlu from the Babson College FutureLab join me. Thank you, guys. Hello, hello, welcome. So before we dive into any further content, I know we're just bombarding people with content, so exciting. Love for you all to introduce yourselves, and I'll maybe start with Sandra, if you don't mind. Just say hello, and also let people know sort of like what brings you into this space, because I'm super excited to bring together a really interdisciplinary team of folks. You know, Laurance introduced this concept that this webinar series is about the kind of low tech to high tech, and I think that we cover that plus everything in the middle. So would love for you to just tell us how you got into this space as well. So Sandra, I'll start with you.
Good. Thank you so much, Kathryn. I'm Sandra Harris, and I'm the state president of AARP Massachusetts. In addition to bringing the perspective of AARP Massachusetts, I bring with me the perspective of being the founder and co-chair of the Massachusetts Task Force to End Loneliness and Build Community, as well as being a personal long-distance caregiver.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sandra. We're so lucky to have you. Molly, can I ask you to unmute and go next?
Sure. Thanks, Kathryn. Hi, everyone. I am Molly Evans. I'm the Senior Programs Manager at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Elder Affairs. And for today's discussion, I really bring the perspective of state government. And as the proud manager of the Family Caregiver Support Program that Brenda spoke so eloquently about earlier, I can also shine a light on how caregivers fit into this larger conversation around loneliness and social isolation.
Great, thanks, Molly. And Sinan, can I turn to you, please?
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. This is my name is Sinan Erzurumlu. I'm a faculty member at Babson College, and I'm also the faculty director of, the FutureLab, which is a social innovation think tank under the Lewis Institute here, and with a partnership with EOEA. I think what I could bring to the table today is our partnerships in this space, trying to solve social challenges that older adults are facing. And through that avenue, we have had many conversations with older adults and understand really their caregiving needs, but also their technological needs and how they're trying to overcome social isolation and loneliness.
Great, thanks, Sinan. Excited to have you. Wonderful. And Mike, you've already had the spotlight. So I think folks know you and your face at this point, but you know, the first question is actually going to go to you. So I think one of the principles of this webinar series that the audience really appreciates is that we ground sort of like this discussion about the issues and not only stories, but data. And so Laurance sort of started to tease out some of these anecdotes, you know, social isolation, it's different than loneliness. Mike, I know in our sort of prior prep conversations, you mentioned, you know, there's a straight line when it comes to outcomes, right? Negative outcomes. So I'm just wondering if you could shed a little more color on that. And then I'm going to turn to some of the other panelists to sort of bring it back to community and tell some stories about how they've seen this, you know, with older adults and caregivers.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathryn. I mean, I think that, you know, the thing I was talking about in the prep, of course, was that there's a big difference between social isolation and loneliness. And while the two things are obviously somewhat connected, they are different, and they're different definitionally. And you know, social isolation is literally the lack of social connections. It's like a structural absence of your ability to have contact. So I loved Brenda's story about, you know, a ramp for someone, right? Because that person was, you know, probably very physically, structurally isolated from others. And her health outcomes were, you know, really impacted by that. You know, she couldn't get out, she couldn't get to the doctor, a bunch of other things, right? Loneliness, of course, can be a state of mind. It's just a different definition. I mean, you can live in a house full of people and you can be lonely, and you can feel isolated. And so I think it's just important when we think about the outcomes that are related to those things. The impact of health, social isolation on health is well studied. The impact of loneliness, social isolation, you know, is also well studied, and they are often mixed, but they both have a huge impact. But they actually have slightly different solutions that are required for each, and I think that's the most important thing for us all to remember when we're getting after those issues.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's a really important distinction, a very important reminder. So I appreciate you putting a fine point on that. Sandra, I wonder if I could turn to you next, and feel free to add to any of the kind of like data stats that Mike shared, but really would love for you to add some color as to what does the issue of social isolation and loneliness look like on the ground with older adults and community? You're so close to that. I'd love to hear more.
Well, thank you. And I would first of all agree with Mike that there is a difference between loneliness and social isolation. And although people who are living in loneliness and social isolation, we know that social isolation can lead to loneliness, but not necessarily so. And we know that some people who want to be in the social isolation space, they don't really want to. They make a choice to be there and not really be in contact with people. But also the other thing is we all know that we have been in situations where we've been in crowded rooms, and because we did not feel connected, we did not feel like we were seen or heard, then we experienced loneliness. We know and how social isolation and loneliness is a public crisis, and studies have shown that isolation can be worse for one's health than obesity. It has been associated with high blood pressure, a greater risk of heart disease, and even earlier onset of dementia. And we all have heard about the equivalence of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Prior to the pandemic, social isolation, we know had reached epidemic proportions. We were seeing it in our states, and we has shown to have the negative impact on physical health. The convergence of the pandemic has only added a spotlight and deepened this epidemic. And unfortunately, our concerns are no longer limited to older adults. According to recent AARP research, 2/3 of American adults report experiencing social isolation, and 66% agree that the pandemic has caused their anxiety levels to change. A recent report from Harvard shows that 61% of young adults 18 to 25 are now reporting out as being the most depressed and the most lonely. So we do have a problem.
Thank you, Sandra. Now, I really want to pull the thread from there, because you said this sort of like twin epidemic of social isolation and loneliness, it impacts people of all ages, not just older adults. And Molly, I'd love for you to talk about, family caregivers can certainly be older adults. We have Sandra here in our panel representing that. But can you just shed a light on what you've seen during the last 2 years, especially when it comes to these two issues and the impact it's had on family caregivers?
Kathryn, what we've seen in Massachusetts, and I think beyond, is that all caregivers to some extent experienced social isolation. And this really didn't matter if you were at home with your loved one, or perhaps your loved one was in a facility and you couldn't access them. This was really a near universal experience for caregivers during the pandemic. And, you think about, there was a time when society was reopening, even pre-vaccines, but caregivers were not able to do that. They still had to take care of people and didn't want to expose their loved ones to COVID. And, a year and a half later from when all of this started, we're still seeing the impacts on caregivers. The CDC put forth a study over the summer showing that 70% of caregivers reported adverse mental health symptoms during the pandemic. And this was even more extreme for sandwich generation caregivers, those who were caring for a child and an older adult. We saw that over 50% of those sandwich generation caregivers had suicidal ideation. So, at its most extreme when it comes to behavioral health, this is what's happening nationally. And this holds true in Massachusetts as well. And really is a reminder that caregivers are experiencing a sense of isolation, a sense of loneliness more than, we might realize.
Thank you, Molly. That I would love if you or someone could drop that CDC study in the chat, because that is such poignant research. So thank you for mentioning that. And Sinan, students, of course, can be people of all ages, but I know from seeing some of the FutureLab students in the past, skewing a little bit younger in the generational spectrum, I just love, because we have you as a panelist, the concept that these are issues that really impact everyone. Could you just provide insight as to, especially during the last 2 years, what these issues have really manifested as far as the student body on campus?
That's true, and particularly like big majority of our students are international students, and as we are doing projects with older adults and aging, it was only evident that and inherent that for them to start reflecting on their own lives, and COVID just like made it very clear as well. So our students are also like struggling with not only like necessarily like staying farther away from their parents and their loved ones, but they are also about seeing that they may not be able to provide any services as freely as they could at the time of COVID. But this is a good time to reflect, right? Because COVID just like made it a little difficult for us, but it really puts into perspective that there might be times like if you don't have the right resources and right programs in place, that this may not be that easy for them. And part of our lab work, this changed our lab work when we were working with older adults. And Kathryn, you know that we worked on connectivity and mobility, and our connectivity project was born out of need, like those who were not even socially isolated before were feeling more and more isolated. And our students were finding this need and asking these questions to them, how to overcome that isolation. But we are finding that that was a new crop of older adults who were very comfortable with technology, but also they were creating new ways of breaking isolation that they were forced into due to pandemic. And we tried to use their stories as positive deviants to create solutions for other older adults, and then try to figure out like if we could have some implications for caregivers. And why caregivers? And because that was our early project when we were doing on mobility. There's a trend that I find every time students come up with great ideas, that they are finding a champion for older adults to learn technology. They are finding a champion for older adults to learn how to use the T, and we're finding that the caregivers was becoming dominant in like defining these solutions for that. And I think those findings reflected on our students as like looking at this as that they will be caregivers one day, but also anything that we would like to propose as a long-time solution for older adults must have the right design for the caregivers as well, and also like starting with us and with our students.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective and how all this kind of like intergenerational work really amplifies itself and lends to great solutions. And because you said the magical S word, solutions, I want to pivot from kind of the problem space to thinking about solution space. And all of you bring a very different perspective and different set of tools into this conversation. And so I'm really excited to get things going. Sandra, I'm going to turn it to you first. I love that in our prep meeting, we talked about the spectrum of low tech to high tech. And you said, I like to think about it as actually low tech, but high touch. So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that, talk about some of the work that you're doing as part of the task force and anything else that you and AARP Massachusetts are bringing into this space.
Absolutely. And we have indeed taken both a high touch approach as well as moving into a high tech approach. Prior to the epidemic, we knew that there were over 540,000 older adults living alone in Massachusetts and who were at risk for loneliness and social isolation. And the epidemic was being manifested in different communities throughout the state. And they were coming to us asking for solutions. We knew that this was a very complex issue that would require complex solutions. And what we decided to do is ARP convened organizations who are already working in this space and put out a call to action. Let's come together. Let's come out of our silos. Let's pool our resources and our ingenuity for a greater impact. And we now have an organization, our task force of over 30 organizations throughout the state working on this issue and hoping to make a difference. One of the first things that we did was we went out and had community conversations to really see and understand firsthand what was really happening on the ground, to understand what was going on in our communities. We had 4 regional conversations. We realized that people were just not aware of the impact of loneliness and social isolation on well-being. So we started a very public awareness campaign. We also launched a Reach Out MA campaign. So from time to time, go and we asked you to kind of tweet some of the information there. But in the Reach Out campaign, we asked base status to reach out, especially to older adults who were living alone, to loved ones they'd not heard about, and reach out in small, safe ways, especially through COVID. We have also begun to work on hoping to bring more people around the table, and we certainly welcome more caregivers around the tables. While being out in the community, we saw practices that were really helping, and we were able to harvest a lot of those and issued It's a Little Thing, which is online resources where communities can go and look at what was happening and working well in other communities. And we've just released a second edition of that, Promising Practices. And because we know that research shows that the next best thing to in-person contact is the digital platform, and we believe that all generations have a role to play in helping to solve this problem, we're beginning to look at developing innovative intergenerational programs to address the digital divide. And our goal for next year also includes working with local communities and creating more welcoming, safe, and socially connected spaces, starting with the outdoors and public spaces, and eventually moving from housing to transportation. So those are the kinds of things that we are doing in the community statewide, and we encourage everyone to become involved and be a part of our process or our solutions.
Thanks, Sandra. So the task force sounds pretty busy. And I assume that folks will get your email at some point if they're interested personally or their organization to join the task force. I see Kara dropping some information in the chat. Thanks, Kara. I would love, Molly, if I could turn to you next. Can you, I love the concept of it's the little things, neighbors helping neighbors. I think during really the height of the pandemic, even we at Elder Affairs and through our work with the task force saw a lot of great examples of this. Can you add any kind of color commentary about, boots on the ground? What did we see?
It was a real joy to see how there were so many incredible examples, like you said, of communities reaching out and helping older adults, helping caregivers connect and find meaning in new and creative ways during the pandemic. And, if we had all the time in the world, if I could tell you about what all 351 towns in Massachusetts were doing, in order to connect with older adults, I would, maybe another day. But really something that we saw in nearly every community was this creative community programming that was created and really strengthened to focus on social isolation and loneliness. One great example that I think really illustrates this concept of it's the little things was the Mass State Police created the Chat with a Trooper program to connect older adults with these volunteer state troopers for these friendly conversations, really having that meaningful connection on a regular basis with, that consistency can make all the difference. And another example was how, in order to address isolation and loneliness, we saw that several councils on aging partnered with local cable access stations to broadcast programming for older adult residents. And a few of my favorite examples, one was in Milford. So residents could tune into their local cable access station for a cooking demonstration or interior decorating class or a fitness class. And other centers instituted really creative at-home arts and crafts with video instructions that would show on local cable. And so in Marlborough, for example, the COA creatively combined curbside planting kits that were available for pickup. And then the local cable access had tutorials on how to plant and care for fresh herbs. And these are just sort of a few of the ways that communities found new and creative ways to connect with older residents in 2020 that was really inspiring to see.
That's great, Molly. And I know Molly could probably list an example for literally all 351 cities and towns in the state. So I appreciate you just picking a few, just giving us a teaser. So I love to turn it over to my colleague Sinan because, we at Elder Affairs and Sandra more recently have had the great privilege of working with you in the context of the FutureLab. And I am just consistently blown away by the FutureLab sort of design thinking approach and process, how students really, observe on the ground, talk to end users, i.e. older adults and family caregivers. Could you just tell us more about sort of that methodology that the FutureLab brings to the space and some of the recent work that you guys have done?
Of course. So the design thinking in a nutshell is actually an approach where like you cannot design for the world, but why can't you design for the person? So the idea is like, so we did a lot of learn from experts a lot. We had a lot of conversations, but the intention is like to talk to as many older adults as possible. And these are mostly like, somewhat like carefree conversations in the sense that we let the older adults like, speak and describe, and I don't even want to say problem because we don't even tell them like, hey, social isolation is a problem and how do you feel about it? But we tell them, what do you like to do? And then after that, well, now with the pandemic, what do you do? So I think through those, we try to see the trends where older adults fit. So our lens is always on the person. And through those conversations, we try to find this common persona or common trends where we could try to identify which are the areas that would be the right way to approach. And this approach is powerful because since it starts with the person, you almost like, let them describe what the problem that they are going through in their own worlds. So I really loved when Sandra said that I want to move from high tech to high touch. And it really like exemplifies like that kind of mentality. And honestly, like our findings were at the FutureLab. Most of the solutions was that we tried to like find the older adults that we could partner because they are still connected and they are good at technology. But then there are older adults that we should embrace, which might have low tech and low social isolation. And we somewhat like not only understand the technical difficulties they go through, but also what is the emotional problems, emotional aspects of going through this. Hence, the whole idea is like, to create innovations, to create ideas that could scale social impact.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Sinan. Yeah, it is such a privilege to see you and the students work and to really have the students prioritize the voice of the people who the solution is trying to affect. Like that co-design principle that Sandra had mentioned earlier on, I think is just something that I hope the audience really takes away because it has been extremely meaningful, not only to like what we're seeing on our side of the work, but I think, to the solution space for older adults. You're creating products and services that are much more meaningful and impactful at the end of the day. So I appreciate you giving us just a taste of what it's like to work at the FutureLab. I know that we are, I don't want to say short on time, but I do want to make sure that the audience has some time to do Q&A. So I'm going to ask if Miss Brenda, you don't mind turning your camera back on. We've talked about solutions. We've talked about a ton of examples about low tech, high touch solutions can really impact the space of social isolation and loneliness for both older adults and caregivers. I wanted to think about the future. So we started talking about the problem space. You all had an opportunity to share a little bit about solutions and what you're kind of currently doing. I would love for you to just say, not in too many sentences, but what like kind of brings you hope, or like what's next for you or your organization when it comes to thinking about creative, innovative solutions in the space. And so I might start with Mike, if you don't mind, and kind of work my way backwards on the screen.
No problem. So what gives me hope? So I think what we've seen, over the last year in development in the last few months and kind of live is that, first of all, there's a lot of resilience in the senior community. I don't think we often give them enough credit for how resilient they are. And they have a lot of desire to learn. They have a huge array of experiences and talents. And when we can find a platform to give them an opportunity to share those and connect with others and take advantage of that, you can see that strong determination that they have to generally connect, and it's kind of inspiring. And so, we want to continue. Our goal is just we want to continue to do that and give them a spot to do it. And then we are also very interested in the things people are talking about, which are making the connections that people have and letting people have those one-to-one calls or things that happen. I love the state police example that was given. I mean, those things are 100% proven to reduce loneliness for people.
Thanks, Mike. Sandra, can I turn it to you next?
Yes, my hope is that we do not allow this pandemic crisis to go to waste. Now that we all have a heightened awareness of what it means to be lonely and socially isolated, it brings me great hope that we can all come together now and join forces to combat this epidemic.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, I think that it's identified as a universal experience, right? And so we should really capture that momentum while we have it. Sinan, can I turn it to you, please?
Of course. So I'm somewhat an outsider, I must say, because like we came into this space and we were exploring, and like a child in a sandbox, we've spoken with a lot of organizations, and that gave us this. Actually, there's so many people trying to do so many things, and sometimes it might be good, and sometimes it may start getting a little inefficient in the sense that some of our resources are already there. So we are really excited to find them. It's almost like, it's not creating new resources, but it's someone reorganizing how to get older adults to those resources. And I was very happy that with Molly and Kathryn, yourself, with our AARP technology subcommittee, we've done the work, put together some of those resources, almost like compile them, so share it with those others who might need them, and so they could benefit from those as well. So that gives me hope. And then the problem is sometimes getting the older adults to those resources in the most efficient way, or at least getting the resources to the right places that they could disseminate them in the right way. So I still think that, like Sandra pointed out, some of the problems that we see can be resolved faster with our more efficient organization. So I would like to continue working on that, and how we could get older adults and to those resources, and then moving on, let them define what kind of resources are best for them to utilize, how they have less effort and better perceived use of it, and that way literally create technology for all.
Great. Thank you, Sinan. Yes, I think sometimes we have to take a step back and realize that the assets and the tools that we have to work with are sometimes really good. And it's just how do we get those to the right people at the right time, at the right place. So it's a really great point. I love that. Molly, I will turn it to you, and then Brenda, you'll clean up Bat here. So Molly, go ahead.
Sure. To me, an area of hope and really an area of opportunity that comes to mind is caregiver self-identification. We know that so many people don't identify as caregivers. In some cultures, it isn't even a word. In others, it's very medicalized. So I guess I am hopeful that more people will recognize themselves in that role and seek support, seek help, because, those resources are out there, like Brenda said earlier.
Great. Thanks, Molly. And Brenda, we started at the top of the hour with you, and I wanted to finish with you as we close, or as we enter the Q&A, because we have a couple minutes left. So would you mind sharing something that brings you hope for the future?
Yeah, I honestly would have to say it's the conversations that we've already begun and will continue with the age-friendly and dementia-friendly communities. I think that, all of our efforts, as long as they're centralized and they're centrific, I think that continues to broaden the scope and reach as many people as possible to keep these conversations moving forward about helping caregivers no matter where they are. In our community, not just for older adults, but those caring for folks with disabilities as well.
Thank you. And I apologize, people seeing me wiping my nose on screen, combating a cold from my daughter. So thank you for the panel. And Brenda, I know you had sort of a celebrity guest spot at the end of the panel, but thank you all for joining for this amazing discussion. And I hope that folks who joined today learned something new, because I'm sure that there was some perspective at the sort of roundtable discussion that you maybe hadn't heard before. So hopefully in the hour we left you with a little inspiration. So before we close, and I turn it to Laurance, there were a couple questions, there are actually many questions, but we only have time for a few, that came in through the chat. And I would love to ask just a couple in the next few minutes. So I'm gonna start with Mike, actually. This was targeted to you. So as a business founder or a business owner and a founder, so why did you begin to work in this space, and what is the business opportunity sort of at large in this aging tech world? Yeah, well, we started working in the space because we just saw a huge need and a huge opportunity. And obviously, it's an important social mission that goes along with it. And when you can put those two things together, it's pretty amazing.
there's a big business opportunity as a for-profit company in this mix. We work with large insurance companies and provide at-risk provider groups and the like every day, and you'd be amazed at how much effort they're putting in to the social determinants of health kinds of issues these days. And loneliness and caregiving are two issues where they're putting a lot of money, and they're all experimenting with new products and services, making it part of your Medicare benefit, making it part of a managed Medicaid benefit, making it available to their patients. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in the loneliness caregiving space in general. I think the biggest thing for those large commercial entities has just been, I'm not sure we have figured out the winning model yet, right? Because we're all here still trying to solve the problem. And so I think it's just going to be, it'll be a number of years where there's going to be a lot of opportunity as going into figuring out, and you see it in the private equity space and venture space as well, pouring a lot of money into these sets of issues.
Thanks, Mike. Sinan, the next question is for you. And the question is actually less about the FutureLab and kind of the way you guys work, and more about, the student body. And so someone asked the question, are you seeing more caregivers in your student body, or maybe even among colleagues, as professors at the university? And like, what sort of the caregiving experience with balancing, academic responsibilities and caregiving responsibilities has looked like?
Well, I think that's true. Since we started this lab, it's almost like when we talk about our projects, it's easy to hear from among my colleagues that, oh, wait a minute, you should hear from my mom because, I'm taking care of her, and then we're going through this. And I'm finding, more and more of us, wearing these shoes and having these responsibilities on campus, and it actually puts into perspective that. Needless to say that the aging population is growing fast. So I think back to the question that Mike received, that at business school, I'm seeing that we are seeing more and more interest in major insurance companies, healthcare companies, seeing how are we going to cater to this group. And with that, of course, comes not only the person, the family that surrounds them. Then, you're thinking how am I going to take care of my aging parents? And one day when I age, how am I going to buy caregiving services for me? And I think we are seeing more and more of this coming up, but not necessarily because we're getting older or people are we have all people from all different aging groups. They bring up these issues, but it's just it's the nature of life. We are seeing these, and insurance companies are now coming forward and moving forward and asking us we want you to explore this space because we realize that most people would be living and then having caregiving services, and we want to see what kind of products might be in that space. So I think as Babson known for entrepreneurship, that we are seeing a lot of entrepreneurial activity in this space, and I think only to see in the next 10 years that there will be more and more startup companies to resolve anything. We call it everything must be redesigned from caregiving to technology solutions to your basic needs that should be taken care of and are designed the right way that older adults would be happy to use. Thanks,
Sinan. And with that major call to action to all partners and sectors here, I want to close our panel Q&A. Thank you again so much, everybody. And I think we can all probably turn ourselves off. And Laurance, you're going to close up the webinar.
Yeah, and I'm going to first give a quick clap. Kathryn, thank you very much for moderating a great discussion. Thank you all for participating in the discussion. And I'm really sorry that we didn't have enough time to hit all of the questions. But so we did record this webinar. We will be sending out a link to that recording. A couple of key things to remember going forward. So first, I dropped in the chat something about an awareness campaign called the Any Care Counts campaign that we recently launched with Blue Cross of Mass and Archangels, and goes to Molly's point in her hopefulness category of making sure that every caregiver recognizes that the care that they do or the care that they take is part of caregiving. And so if you go to anycarecountsma.com, you can take the caregiving intensity quiz, which has been used and validated by many folks, including in that 2021 CDC study that was referenced earlier in the discussion that just has shown the massive impact that the pandemic has had on people's perception of the intensity of caregiving. And Paul just dropped the link in as well. Also, in November, we are getting together for members and prospective members of the Massachusetts Caregiver Coalition. We're excited to announce that on November 18th, we're going to have an in-person event for the first time in the last 18 months at Price Waterhouse in the Seaport. So look out for the invitation there. We're really looking forward to getting together a group of folks to talk about the work that employers can do to support their family caregivers. And November is National Family Caregiver Month. So please spend some time to thank a caregiver that you know for the work that they do. Encourage folks to take the Any Care Counts campaign and get their score. And again, thank you to all of the panelists and speakers today, and thank you to the audience for participating. We will be back in touch in the new year as we continue this Innovations in Caregiving series. So thank you. See ya.